Are you or your clients looking for a regular income solution with compelling returns to diversify your portfolio? If so, Neighborhood Holdings may be a great option for you. Listeners of this podcast will appreciate that public markets can be turbulent and finding a good private credit fund can be tough. But Neighborhood's track record, transparency, and investor alignment sets it apart from the pack. With nearly 10 years of consistent performance and a target net yield of 8 to 10%, Neighborhood has a track record of providing monthly income to investors without the volatility of public markets. How do they do this? Where banks invest in mortgages up to 95% loan to value, they also make borrowers jump through a lot of hoops. Many borrowers in transition aren't able to meet those hoops. Neighborhood has partnered with banks and brokers to provide quality borrowers with temporary financing secured by first mortgages at an average loan to value of less than 60%. Where other mortgage funds might take more risk by lending against construction, bare land, or jumbo loans, Neighborhood is focused on your average residential borrower who owns the average house in the neighborhood. Plus, their variable rate with a floor mortgage pricing benefits investors when interest rates go up and mitigates downside risk. Check out the link in the description or visit neighborhoodholdings.com to view the offering memorandum or speak to your financial advisor for more information. That's neighborhoodholdings.com/Loonie Hour. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that this information discussed today is not intended to be or construed as investment advice. Please consult a professional advisor before putting a loonie in any of these financial markets.
The dirty secret is that no one's ever going to get paid back.
People have the shortest memories when it comes to investment.
We just got to get Keith into Bitcoin.
Hey, there's a bubble.
Welcome back to Loonie Hour, episode 164. As always, joined by the three amigos, Boomer, Keith Dicker, IceCap Asset Management, Rich Diaz. What's going on?
Well, guys, there's been a significant development at trivia night, quiz night.
Oh, no.
So I mentioned before I have fun with my friends, so it's great. But I mentioned that the topics aren't exactly something that I know anything about. Because remember last time, what did we talk? It was the King's
Meghan Markle, which we were destroyed for.
You know what? If we're going to be wrong on a few things, it's okay to be wrong on that. But this week, which was last night, the person who normally is the host wasn't available. So the bartender guy took over the last minute. First question. You ready? What is the number one Christmas movie of all time?
Die Hard.
Yes, of course it is. Second question. How many zeros are in a quintillion?
15.
There's 18. It's like, boom. So I went from the bottom of the barrel to being like the cool guy, Steve. I was Mr. Cool.
Oh, so the bartender's got his, does he still have a job or what?
Well, we'll see. I told him he did a great job. We'll see what happens next week. But our team, which is called Smarty Pints, get it? Smarty Pints.
Okay.
Rich?
I thought you were off the beers.
They serve other things.
Okay.
Yeah. Rich, what's going on with you?
I don't know. I'm feeling the vibe, man. Feeling the vibe.
Vibecession.
Just good vibes everywhere. Everywhere I just see lots of good vibes everywhere. I've been totally misunderstanding the economy. Everything I've ever said on this podcast is untrue. I haven't had the right vibes. And now I do. And everything's great. The sun is shining.
Is that because you're back? He's back from Ottawa.
That's right. Yeah, I was in Ottawa.
Tell us your story.
Well, my story was that I was invited graciously to question period, which is really cool and kind of dumb and also amazing and wonderful. It's amazing to live in a democracy. Let's never, ever forget how important that is. And it's cool that people can question our dear leader in a public forum without fear of reprisal, which is important. And at one point, he was talking about the foreign direct investment and how much that's improved in Canada and how they're doing everything they can to attract foreign capital and etc. And I made a mistake, and it's very buttoned down. You're not allowed your phone, and you're certainly not allowed to talk or yell or whatever in the gallery. But when I heard our dear leader talk about foreign direct investment, I guffawed. I just let out like an involuntary laugh, and I think some of
What's a guffaw? Do your guffaw. Let's hear it.
Like everyone knows Rich's laugh when that thing cackles. It
Yeah,
it
I didn't
goes.
quite cackle. I at the last second I pulled it in, but I think a couple people in the opposition on the opposition benches noticed, and I was very embarrassed. But I actually think that they kind of thought it was funny. So that's my claim to fame, ladies and gentlemen. I will clearly never be invited back. So there you go. It wasn't too
I'm gonna
loud.
have to
Like
go
no one
back and
noticed.
check the
Unless you
footage.
were yeah. Unless you were looking at me, you wouldn't have noticed. But it was yeah.
Well,
there
we
you
know
go.
one thing about question period. It's definitely not called answer period.
No, it's definitely not. It's really cool. It's a real privilege to go and check it out. I think if you ever get a chance, you should take it. It's beautiful. The room's beautiful, and it's not even the real room because they're renovating the actual Parliament building. And so there you go.
How much money are they spending on that?
I don't know, but I think every penny will be worth it. I think it's good to spend money on parliaments and stuff. I know I'm a sucker. Anyways,
No, I agree with Rich on this. I think we do need a good
Oh wow!
government building or house and stuff like
I'm
that.
surprised that you
right?
believe. I'm surprised we agree on this.
Yeah, we do agree on this. Absolutely.
Keith, are you running?
I do think question period is absolutely it is a unproductive asset at this point.
Yeah, I
It's
get it.
just it's full of like gotcha moments.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
It is.
how does
It
that
is.
add any value?
It doesn't, but it doesn't, but I think it represents something. It represents, I mean, there are plenty of countries where you cannot openly challenge. I mean, I joke about Justin Trudeau being our dear leader, but there are countries where you do have a authoritarian dictatorship and you cannot challenge people publicly and make fun of them and call them a liar and call them incompetent, which is exactly what Pierre Poilievre did.
So now I'm going to disagree. I'm back on the other side now, Rich.
Okay.
Because you notice during question period, is only one side is allowed to disagree with the other. If is anyone's, for example, on the Liberal side or NDP side, if they disagree with the leader,
Yeah, they're out.
they ain't gonna stand up and
Okay, fine.
voice that. If you do that,
All
you
right.
lose your polio and all that, all that stuff.
Fair enough.
I just
Anyways.
yeah.
Okay. Well, that's my story.
I keep telling you guys, give me one weekend and I could turn the country around. I would call it answer period. And you better answer, buddy.
You can be the head of Doge Canada.
That's right.
That'd be fun.
Dutch Canada.
Yeah.
We need that.
But yeah, we'll get into it later on in the pod. We do want to talk about the Vibecession and work through some of those numbers. The GST holiday, we got an update on that. Keith, it looks like in Ontario they're going to be matching the GST rebates or discounts from the Fed. So obviously they have the HST there. So Ontario government came out today, the day they were recording, saying that they're going to basically match the federal government. So again, I'm from BC here. I don't know what the total HST savings is in Ontario, but Rich, what is it?
I think well, it's
13?
50. I think it is 1-3 over where I am over here in the commie in the Maritimes.
Not
It's-
anymore.
It's 1-5. It's 1-5 over here. And
Oh, it says it is 13% in Ontario.
yes. So I assume, I mean, if you're a small business owner and you have to try to carve out the GST from the HST component, I mean, give me a break. You're not going to be able to do it. It's just going to create more, chaos and confusion. So I'm not surprised, the provinces have to turn around by default and match it. So over here now, I guess I don't pay any heating oil tax. Is that right? That happened a while back. Now I'll get a break from HST, $250 check coming in.
Well, I have another story.
I'm liking this. I'm feeling the
another story
vibe,
related.
Rich. I'm starting to feel this now.
I have another story about these vibes, super cool vibes, which is I went to dinner, as you do, and I was speaking to the restaurant owner, and he was pissed about the GST holiday. He thinks and it wasn't that. He's like, number one, it's already our busiest season, so people are going to come anyways. That was interesting. He didn't think about that. Second thing, he's like, it's such a pain in the ass. He said, this is what he said to me. He's like, this is such a pain for us. He's like, now I have to go and sit and think about what follows what, like, if something falls in the category, it doesn't. And he said, I mean, he was not happy about how much of this just basically creates a huge headache for him as a small business owner, which I thought was interesting.
My wife was saying that she doesn't really necessarily follow the politics space, but she was like, it starts December 15th. Why the hell would they do that? Everyone's already done all their Christmas shopping on the 15th, and who's buying stuff on January 15th? And I was like, well, I certainly won't have my Christmas shopping done by the 15th, but I mean, I get the point. I mean, it's kind of like, yeah, like, I don't know. Do people delay their purchases to the 15th to save 5%, or is it already too late? I mean, if you talk to any sort of debt consultant or anyone that runs like a retail business, I mean, you know that sales fall off a cliff after the holiday season.
Are we wrong with this? Why did, again, we clearly haven't done our homework on this, GST thing, but it's only on, I should take that back. Is it on big ticket items, or is it just on like on a pair of jeans, or
It's on like
like
necessities.
a
We
sandwich,
went over the
like
list.
a takeaway sandwich from the grocery store or something?
Well, snacks are included.
Yeah, so it'd be on food, like a booze. I think like the booze, for example, I think it was anything under like 7% alcohol. So like beer is exempt, but like a bottle of wine, to my knowledge, is not.
What? Wait, what?
Yeah, suck on that. No Pinot for you, buddy.
Yeah, it's fluff. It's yeah.
Anyways, it's confusing. BC here, of course, doesn't have the HST. We have the 5% GST and then the 7% provincial tax. So we get up to 12. Alberta doesn't even have a provincial sales tax. But meanwhile, if you're in Ontario, you've got the HST, so you're getting the full 13% off. I don't know. It's super confusing, and this is kind of part of the problem.
So if you want to help out small businesses, right, this is how you do it. Instead, you announce, hey, on January the 15th, we're going to quadruple the GST.
Well, so the best.
Oh, mothers, if you're going to buy something, you better do it now before January 15th.
The best tweet so far is from Dan Kelly. He's the president and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. So he basically represents like small, medium businesses in the country. And so he says, his tweet, he says, keep in mind that 6 weeks after the proposed 5% GST holiday expires, the federal carbon tax will rise by 19%, and the carbon tax finds its way into the permanent price of every consumer item, not just the narrow list of products that are temporarily exempted from the sales tax.
Yeah, but he doesn't have the right vibes, you see. He hasn't been vibing.
He's not seeing straight. But speaking of the carbon tax, we have a very special guest coming on the show this week. And so, in relation to what's been happening in the news recently, is you'll know that a couple of weeks ago, the federal government put in legislation for an emissions cap on the energy sector here in Canada. So an emissions cap, people are saying, well, that the emissions cap is de facto a production cap on Canadian oil and gas. And then more recently, we had the Orange Man. The Orange Man came out and says that they would levy up to 25% tariffs on everything being imported from Canada and what that would do to our natural resource sector, et cetera. All of our governments, provincial, federal governments are now freaking out. So we want to bring on the show today a special guest, Heather Exner-Pirot. She is Director of Energy, Natural Resources, and Environment for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and Special Advisor to the Business Council of Canada. She's got a long background track record in the natural resources space. So she's been writing some incredible articles that she's been sharing on Twitter. So we figured we would bring her onto the show today to get her insights and to really understand what this all means for us Canadians. So without further ado, let's jump over to that interview right now. Heather, welcome to the Loonie Hour, first appearance.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you on. I guess we'll cut right to the chase. A couple of weeks ago, we had an emissions cap that was announced. Some people are saying this emissions cap is de facto a production cap on the oil and gas sector, which is going to particularly impact Alberta. You know, you had Premier Daniel Smith that was very vocal about it, trying to enact the Alberta Sovereignty Act and fight this thing. I don't know what your take is on all of this. How do you sort of unpack what this all means just for the average Canadian that maybe isn't in tune with the politics of the energy space?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's part of the Liberal government's, they've had this agenda of having us meet our Paris Agreement goals. The Canadian oil and gas sector has been growing. And I think the one thing people don't appreciate is that emissions in the sector as a whole, absolute emissions peaked in 2015, even though our production has grown by about 1 million barrels a day since then. And so there are, good efforts being made in the sector, lots of investments being made to reduce the emissions. But the federal government wants to make it faster and in such a way that it will be very painful and there will be production cuts. And despite, Minister Wilkins, kind of best defense that it'll create jobs and it'll create production. Absolutely no one that has analyzed it. And, Deloitte, Conference Board of Canada, many others have put out, S&P Global have put out the math in their methodology. And the consensus is it'll probably cut between 600,000 barrels to 2 million barrels a day. And we know from other events happening this week with the Trump tariffs, that our one ace up our sleeve is oil and gas. And what a terrible time to be, this own goal of cutting this production at a time when the Canadian economy absolutely cannot take it. And what that means, and no one cries tears for the oil sands, but I had another article put out this last week that showed, sometime this quarter, maybe this week, the oil sands will hit $1 trillion in spend cumulatively. And of that, $187 billion has been taxes and royalties. And at the current rate of spend the last 3 years, we'll hit the next trillion in half the time. And I think we all agree that we need those royalties and the taxes more than ever, especially as we have to do defense spending. With an emissions cap, there will not be investment. There will not be $16.5 billion in a carbon capture pipeline because they won't be able to afford it. There will not be new LNG terminals, and there will not be offshore Newfoundland and Atlantic Canada. Because obviously, if you're going to cut existing production before you build new production to cut. So just a devastating blow. Now, the silver lining, I guess you could say, is that no one expects this will ever see the light of day. Obviously, the Liberals are not doing well. They have plotted it at the very least so that it wouldn't really start to have an effect till 2026 and later. So no one expects this will happen. But in the meantime, investment is spooked. No one wants to invest. There is uncertainty. The valuation of our oil and gas companies is lower because of this, and our hand is weaker when we're dealing with the Trump administration because of it too. So this is politics, not policy. I think they are just trying to prevent their NDP voters from bleeding away. Is the only reason I can think that they would do something like this, but it has an economic impact.
What is
Wow,
your?
perfect.
I want a quick question. Yeah, I want a quick question first. And so, I mean, this is very clear to you, obviously, and to us, and you articulate it very well. And I imagine other people are articulating it very clearly as well to Ottawa. What is the response? Is there how is the conversation in the room, or is there no conversation at all? It's just papers flying back and forth and then someone makes a decision.
Yeah, I think, for Guilbeault, not to get personal, but just that, he really is kind of a true believer in climate change. And I think there's even a sense from, some of those cabinet ministers that they're doing us a favor, that oil demand is going to collapse anyways, inevitably. And so there's no harm done to cut our production by that amount because no one will be buying it anyways in 2030. And Minister Wilkinson even said that this year. He said oil demand will probably peak globally in 2024. Which is such a preposterous statement for anyone that follows.
But if that's the response from Ottawa, the other response simply has to be, then why apply a cap? Why do you need
let
to do
demand
it if it's
do
going
the
to happen?
job.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's going to happen naturally.
Exactly. That's exactly what.
Is that
that's
part
exactly
of the
what I was saying.
IEA forecast, though?
Okay.
I would love
to get into this. The IEA
politically
forecast,
captured.
it's not a forecast. It's not a forecast. It's based on policy. It's a scenario, and they say this so clearly, based on current policy. Guess what? With the Trump administration, that current policy also will mean that we're looking into, the later 2030s. But even then, I think the IEA was saying 2030. Now with current policies, we see Germany turn to a right-wing government. Just based on current policies, the IEA will have to admit it goes out further. But I want you guys to know that the EIA, the U.S. Energy Information Administration, has its own forecast, not a scenario based on climate policies, but a forecast, and doesn't see oil demand peaking before 2050. And it doesn't say when, it just says it won't be before 2050. Why, you guys? Because 6 billion people have access to almost no oil today. And if even 1 billion of them in Asia becomes middle class in the next decade, as we all expect they will, then of course oil demand will go up. So even as China plateaus, even as the United States plateaus, even as Europe declines, the other 6 billion people on the planet inevitably will be using more oil.
I just want to say that we found a worthy replacement for me on the Loonie Hour, because no one has defended the reality of the fossil fuel industry as eloquently as you have. So I don't even know what I'm going to do. I have no questions.
We're just in violent
Steve,
agreement.
Ask a question. I'm all out. You've done a fantastic job, Heather.
I mean, this kind of gets into some of the elements of the carbon tax as well. I mean, I don't know if Trump's sort of stance now that the orange man's in is drill baby drill. I don't know. Are we?
I would love to. I want to talk about this.
Yeah. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
There's no American drill baby drill. And even who said that this week? The CEO of Exxon said there's not going to be any drill baby drill. And this is, again, when we're talking about Trump tariffs and who has what leverage. Mm-hmm. Americans, they had this great shale revolution, amazing. They became from the world's largest importer to the world's largest producer, producing more oil and gas today than any nation on earth has ever produced. All of that. We're also hitting record production levels. But oil is a non-renewable resource, and we know what the shale basin looks like. We know what lands they've gone through. We know what's happening geophysically to what they're pulling out, the molecules are pulling out today, which is it's getting gassier and lighter. And we know that it'll peak. And again, even the Occidental CEO said literally last week, we're at risk of losing American energy independence in the next couple of years. So we can debate if they peak next year, if they peak in 4 years, but you will find very few people that don't think that shale production will peak by 2030 and probably sooner. Who will come and replace that? Again, Canada, with its over a century worth of oil reserves in the oil sands, will be their number one pick, which is why at the same time as Trump threatened 25% tariffs on oil and gas, he also said that he wants to reinvigorate Keystone XL.
Yeah, I mean, that's perfect. I think the other thing, so you're talking about the Permian Basin. Sorry, so not everybody knows.
So there's a few basins, and you can go ahead. But Permian is obviously is the biggest shale producer, the granddaddy of them all. But there's several good shale basins. Some of them have already turned the corner. I think Haynesville, for example, have already peaked and have already declined. The Bakken, if it hasn't peaked, is also very close to peaking. Had a bit of a rebound after a COVID dip. So there's quite a bit of shale that, and again, when we're talking about shale, we talk about the hydraulic fracturing, the fracking, and the horizontal drilling. So those were the technological innovations that gave access to these different sources that previously were uneconomic. Obviously, they've been sitting there for hundreds of millions of years, made them economic. But now they've just, gorged on cheap oil and gas for a decade. Good for them, to their credits. We had energy abundance, but nothing lasts forever.
Can you talk about the import, just maybe pulling back a little bit more and focusing on Canada? Can you talk about a little bit more about how important our exports are to? I know you talk about to Canadians' economy. I know you talk about royalties, but that's sort of. Can you give us some more of a broader view of how important it is to our economy, if that's okay?
Well, I mean, it's preposterously important to our economy, because I think it's about 25% of our exports, if not more. And it's our trade balance. With oil, we have a positive trade balance with the United States. And without oil, it's like negative, hundreds of billions of dollars. And, globally, and what would it mean if we didn't have a good trade balance? The dollar would fall even further. And that's, everybody feels on every single thing that we purchase in this country, that we don't grow here, we don't produce here, we don't manufacture here. If the dollar is weaker, and we are going to feel it this week, if the dollar is weaker, then it costs us more. So oil is what is keeping our dollar even at 70 cents, which, without oil, I don't know what it would be, 50 cents, 55 cents, you know what I mean? If we cut those 2 million barrels in production with the emissions cap. We should also replace it with other things. It should be, in addition to oil, we should be, adding other things that the world needs. But imagine taking away, it'd just be crazy.
My next question is there a business case for natural gas? And then that's it for me.
Yeah. absolutely there's a business case for natural gas, because what people don't appreciate is the natural gas we have in Alberta and in eastern BC is the cheapest in the world. What we are paying for natural gas, $2 a thousand, 1,000 cubic feet, whatever it is a tenth, an order of magnitude less than what they pay in Europe right now, what they pay in Asia. That means it's the delta between what it costs us and what we pay for it here to liquefy it and ship it. If they're paying, let's say $20, $25, and we're paying $2, well, that gives you $20 to liquefy it and ship it. And it doesn't cost $20 to liquefy it and ship it. And so that is the delta we're talking about, why it makes so much economic sense. Now, another question is there demand for natural gas? And we have seen absolute, incredible rise of natural gas consumption in the United States, but also elsewhere. Why? Because for the first time in a long time, we're seeing real big energy additional demand because of data centers and AI. So one thing is the data centers and AI, and Korea will need it, and Japan will need it, and Europe will need it. The other thing is displacing Russian gas. Europe has cut off Russian gas. Someone has to fill that gap. Norway's oil and gas production is peaking next year. I don't think that is a cause to raise alarm bells, but Norway is obviously now Europe's biggest provider of gas. Its production is peaking next year. And then finally, if anyone wants to reshore from China and bring back some of that manufacturing, which we all do, not least for defense purposes, most of those are energy intensive industries. So if you want to bring back mineral processing, if you want to bring back EV, solar panel manufacturing, battery manufacturing, that takes a lot of energy. You can use coal, or you can use natural gas. So I'm not worried. Plus all the billions of Asians I said that were about to get richer. That's also part of it.
And I just want to play devil's advocate, because one of the sort of rebuttals that you hear online, it's not my rebuttal, but is there's no business case again for shipping Canadian natural gas over to Europe. Basically that the rebuttal is natural gas from the west to the east would be too expensive to transport. It would cost billions of dollars in infrastructure to build out, and it would take many, many years. And so it's just not worth the cost, and we would not be competitive. I don't know if any of that reigns true, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, two things. One is the most generous interpretation of Trudeau's, admonition that there was no business case is that Germany was offering only 15-year contracts because of their, climate goals, and that you probably need a 20-year contract to get the security, that you do want. So that was, the most generous. But those American LNG manufacturers figured out a business case for it. And because Germany didn't sign long-term contracts, because some Europeans didn't want to do that, they're making hay on spot prices, like ridiculous. It would be so much cheaper for Europe if they had longer term, more stable contracts. But those guys want to buy on the spot market. Let them have at it. American LNG producers are getting rich. Now, but the main argument I would say, Steve, is let the private sector take on that risk. Why would the Liberals, why would the federal government make that decision? Is it too expensive? Will you have a business case or not? They're not asking for subsidies. They're not asking for the government to build those LNG terminals. If they think there's a business case, they're willing to put private money, private capital into it, take on that risk. Let them. And the thing about it is, it wasn't that much infrastructure. There was the Quebec LNG Saguenay was rejected, I kid you not, in February 2022. As Russia was putting, equipment and men on the border with Ukraine, Guilbeault rejected that on the grounds of emissions, on climate change grounds. What they would have done is just extended a pipeline. Natural gas goes to Ontario. That infrastructure exists. Extend that pipeline from Ontario to the St. Lawrence. So we're talking about a 600. It's not that it wasn't a big deal. But it's not building it from northeast BC. It's building it from Ontario, where they already get their natural gas.
So, Steve, I think Heather's used the word delta now 4 times. So we clearly have a replacement for Rich when that day comes.
Oh.
It's good to hear that. Heather, everyone has a view on everything. That's just the way we're wired. And hearing your thoughts and other thoughts that we've heard as well, The argument supporting Canadian energy, from our view, of course, it's very positive. Right? It's incredibly positive from many different angles, especially from an aggregate trade perspective and foreign investment coming in, and U.S. dollars coming back into our economy and things like that. From your experience so far within your network, is the energy sector in Alberta especially, as well as Newfoundland, are you getting support from the non-energy lobby groups or sectors in Canada? Or is it just everyone against energy and that's it?
I mean, there was certainly a time, I think, where they felt very alone. For example, the Mining Association of Canada supported the Impact Assessment Act in 2019. The financial sector is not always a vocal proponent, even though they know how important it is to Canada. But I would say, and we've all noticed since Russia invaded Ukraine and we did have an energy crisis, and oil and gas were obviously, huge geopolitical tools, a change in the conversation everywhere. And I will note, for example, a lot of them came out on the emissions cap. It was a pretty concerted effort. And just yesterday, National Bank came out and said we shouldn't have clean electricity regulations either. And that's the first time I've seen the financial sector come out. The emissions cap maybe is obvious, and it's not even that controversial to say that it's dumb. But to say that the clean electricity regs have to go also, that's for me, we're entering a different, post-Trump, there's a different sentiment out there.
So maybe that pendulum's starting to swing, right? We are now...
That pendulum started to swing in 2022, and now I would say the pendulum has crossed over.
Don't we have laws that were enacted in Canada. Am I correct here in saying there was laws that were enacted that you can't even talk positively about
nat gas over oil
and gas?
Correctly. Oh yeah.
Can you explain that? Yeah.
I would love to. I'm writing a paper with Sonia Savage on it right now, which I'm so excited about. She's the former Environment and Energy Minister of Alberta, and very, very sharp.
If you can use the word delta again, it would be really
I will
cool.
not. I will not. But so we call it the greenwashing bill. But it was part of the C-59 kind of omnibus, amendments that the government did to pass the budget bill. Anyways,
federal government, correct?
Yes, as a federal law. So what they did is they made changes to, the Competition Act and the Competition Bureau to say that anything misleading about, oil and gas, now you can make that a group, I think technically it's a group of 6 people together, an organization, whatever, can make a complaint, and the onus is on, the oil and gas company to disprove their claims instead of them having to prove the claims. And the penalty is up to 3% of gross global revenues. Which, nuts. If you're talking about CNRL and Suncor, so if you're wondering why Pathways took all that stuff, every lawyer in Calgary has told oil and gas companies not to speak, not to post. They aren't putting up annual reports, their sustainability reports. And you just have to remember, they already had to disclose everything to their investors, based on just basic, which you can explain what people have to disclose and why they can't lie, and why if they project in the future, they have to have disclaimers and all those things. They already had to do that, already did it. This was a very late stage amendment in committee by the NDP with, I will say, and I'll argue my paper, with very coordinated support from environmental NGOs. We call them ENGOs. And you can see the coordination in their statements, and they took credit for it. So don't tell me they didn't coordinate, they celebrated and took credit for it. To basically, we say, green hush the oil and gas sector. And so that even nonprofits, have been advised by lawyers, there's a big risk if you speak out. So again, just, kind of these backdoor things from people that represent maybe a couple dozen, at the most, a couple hundred people in this country, shutting up our oil and gas sector to the extent that they cannot explain to investors what they are doing. And it's literally no aspirational statements to the future. And I was like, what did Pathways say? What did they do that made these guys so mad? I kid you not, I sat through a 90-minute webinar to find out they used green and blue and clouds in their posters. And that was misleading. I kid you not, that was the most provocative smoking gun I could find from a 90-minute webinar that, I'll never get back in my life.
But thankfully, it seems like we've started to make the shift, of course, with given the escalation in geopolitics. And again, I think the Orange Man signals that's probably turning in a different direction as well.
Ever been abroad and needed Wi-Fi? Download Saily. Tired of telecom oligopolies ripping you off? Download Saily. Want to avoid sketchy SIM sellers at the airport? Download Saily. Saily might be the only travel app you need. It provides an internet connection wherever you travel and saves you money on roaming fees. It's easy to use, affordable, and reliable all over the world. Saily is the modern, seamless way to get connected without the need for physical SIM cards. With eSIM technology, you can instantly activate service from anywhere in the world. No more waiting in line for a local SIM or dealing with expensive roaming charges. Saily offers flexible plans to fit your needs, whether you're traveling for work or leisure. Plus, you can switch between networks in just a few taps, ensuring you always get the best coverage at the best rates. Whether you're a frequent traveler, an expat, or just someone who wants more flexibility with their phone, Saily's got you covered. No hidden fees, no contracts, just affordable, reliable data wherever you go. Visit Saily.com/Loonie Hour for 15% off.
Can we talk about the tariffs that they've put forth? Again, I know that. I think you recently argued in a paper that they're probably not as realistic as all the politicians are freaking out. Provincial governments, federal governments, everybody's talking about this on the news. And oh my God, 25% tariff. See, we told you he was bad. Can you just talk about the legitimacy of these tariffs that are coming down the pipe or not coming down the pipe?
Well, something will certainly come down the pipe. And this is, again, like I say, the silver lining of all this is that both Canadian and American publics now fully appreciate to an extent they never have how important Canadian oil is to the American economy. And so that even as they have ramped up production from shale is very light sweet, and their refineries were built in the 70s to process heavy and sour. And so today, even as they've increased their production, they've increased Canadian imports and displaced, for example, Saudi or Iranian or Venezuelan. So we're now
just because people don't know those words. What is
so
Canadian
heavy and sour? So it has
Canadian
and light versus light sweet. And people, you do pay less for heavy sour, but they are optimized to produce it. And there are certain components, in the hydrocarbon molecule that are different in heavy oil versus light oil. And there are certain products you can only make with heavy oil, like asphalt, comes to mind. But there are many in the chemical process where you need the heavy oil molecule to make your plastics, depending on what the product is. Anyways, the point is refineries, a quarter of American refinery throughput is Canadian oil. 1/4 of American refinery throughput is Canadian oil. And you cannot recalibrate that, otherwise they would have, for cheap. And no one's building new refineries in 2024. I promise you, that's not been an easy thing to get investment for that, to change it from heavy to light. And so basically, with 4.3 million barrels a day we're sending down south, you cannot find that on the global markets to make up for it. They cannot produce it to make up for it. And imagine Trump going and asking OPEC to ramp up their production and their exports to the United States. Texas would go ballistic because right now the price of WTI is $70. Some of those Texas basins have a break even at 68. They cannot afford any more global supply coming onto the market. So Trump going to ask Iran to send more heavy to Canada to displace Canadian oil, not going to happen. It would be ridiculous. 2.9 million of those 4.3 million barrels go to Midwest refineries. Guess who those Midwest refineries? Basically a pipe from Canada to their refinery. There's no other pipe hitting those refineries that they can bring in Iranian or Venezuelan if they wanted to. Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan. Guess which are the swing states? If Trump wants those guys to pay 75 cents more a gallon for their gasoline, which they will feel very quickly, they will feel that. The beautiful thing about gasoline is the only commodity that you feel the global price swings almost immediately. They need our nickel, they need our copper, they need our tellurium, they need our uranium. You will feel the gasoline in the first week. And so I just cannot believe, even if it'll be painful for us, even if it's more painful for us, that the Republicans will want to see gas prices in Wisconsin and Michigan go up 75 cents a gallon. The thing about Trump is he came in on a promise of energy dominance. Why they voted for Trump was not for tariffs, but for cheaper energy bills. That's why people actually voted for him. He promised that he would have energy bills. And last time around, they had the shale revolution. And this time around, they had the shale peak. And so to think that they can replace or that they want or that they will put on these 25% tariffs that will increase their gasoline bills. And also, by the way, Inauguration Day is January 20th. They're going to put 25% tariff on Canadian natural gas in January. We send more natural gas. We send 8 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas to the United States. It's more than Russia sent to Germany. That's how much we send in natural gas. And you're going to put a 25% tariff on in January? Good luck at the next elections. This is what politically, this would be so toxic. I just cannot believe that they would do that to themselves. Today, you had the American Petroleum Institute, the American refineries, the fertilizer guys, the ag guys, the manufacturing guys, all making the case for us, for Canada. Do not put those tariffs on us. We don't even have to make the case for ourselves.
Can I ask, if I may, boys, can I switch gears just a tiny bit to talk about mining? Because I understand you know quite a bit about that space as well. I mean, one of the things I talk about a lot in my own videos and on the pod is that CapEx CapEx in mineral exploration, which yes is dominated by oil, is at a 30-year low adjusted for inflation. But that's also reflecting the fact that it's very difficult to build mines in this country. And mining is obviously important, even if you want to do an energy transition. So can you talk about sort of the difficulties that Canadian investors and businesses have with mining and sort of expanding their operations here?
Absolutely. So, the data that I've seen, and maybe it's, the adjustment in dollars or not, is that global capital expenditures in mining peaked in 2014 globally. We've added 1 billion people since 2014, and our mining expenditures are lower. And we want to have an energy transition. I always say, the IEA says we need 6 times more mining to have, transition after fossil fuels. I don't think we're going to have 1 times more mining. And the problem, Richard, as you know, is it's mostly the commodity price. I would say it's half the commodity price and then half, kind of political uncertainty. So within Canada, we roughly follow the same thing, the same global cycle. But we do have, we are a safe jurisdiction on some aspects, but also a very costly and expensive jurisdiction on the other. And of course, the Impact Assessment Act made that worse. It was passed in 2019. Not a single mine has been approved under the impact assessment. It's been around for 5 years. Not a single mine has been approved under the Impact Assessment Act, which was passed over 5 years ago.
Sorry, not one mine.
Only one project, Richard. That's Cedar LNG is the only project that the impact assessment has been passed under the auspices of the IEA.
In 5 years.
Since it was passed. Now, there are some things that were put into the system. I know, it's crazy. They were put into the system on the SIA 2012 that are still going through the system, but very far and few in between. So what is the result of all this? I want to share, with all the people that love EVs and want to have, $52 billion in subsidies for battery manufacturing, is that since 2012, our production of nickel, of cobalt, and of graphite has declined by about 40%. And our production of copper has declined by 9%. And how are we are going to be importing those metals if we want to build batteries in this country. So it's just a shocking turn of events. And, oil and gas has had a hard ride on this government, but people don't appreciate that the amount of mining projects that were in the national projects, major projects inventory in 2015 have declined by more than oil and gas projects have. It's something like 55% fewer projects by value in the major projects inventory since 2015, which was the peak. Anyways,
Heather, are you hearing any talk about the Conservatives maybe softening?
Yes.
This was it a bill in 2019, or I don't know what it's called.
So it was C69. It was C69, which is probably what your listeners were. So
so will this be softened or taken away? Like because obviously what I'm hearing now, I think of the world in foreign currency all the time in FX. So clearly we are going to really struggle bringing in USD if this continues. And especially if energy continues to get choked. I don't think it will. I think that will get sorted out. But we are positioned to have this perfect scenario to have the Canadian dollar get chopped in half. I mean, that's basically what we're headed towards. But what are the, you think this might be softened coming
Yeah.
up, or we'll
So-
continue going down this bad road?
Yeah, so the only good thing about being at rock bottom is there's only way up. And I think the TSX, like, let's all think, you guys tell me, what will the TSX jump the day the Conservatives are elected? But they have already promised to repeal C-69. Now, proponents and investors don't love the pendulum swing. They don't want new legislation every 4 years. And so industry associations are very much now talking about how to improve it. And the improvement is basically to follow what the Constitution says and what the Supreme Court said in October, which was that IEA is unconstitutional. You have to change it, that natural resources are primarily provincial jurisdiction. And so basically to restrict federal assessment to only the bare minimum of what the federal government must control, which is things on federal lands, interprovincial pipelines, ports, those kinds of things. They still have to permit some water because of fisheries and oceans, and they don't even have to do the Indigenous consultation because that's the Crown's responsibility, and provincial governments also are crowns. So the argument I think you'll see from industry is they want one project, one assessment, one decision. That in almost all cases, that should be the provincial government, according to the Constitution, like just follow what the Supreme Court said you have to do. And then, some of the provinces have to get better at this too. But you have some provinces like Saskatchewan, like Quebec in particular, are very good at permitting. And something like BHP's Jensen potash mine, which was, I think, probably the biggest mining investment in Canada. It was BHP's, the world's largest miner's biggest investment it's ever made. That didn't require a federal assessment. It was passed, I think, a couple of years ago. They sat on the decision, did the FID maybe a year or two ago to expand. Anyway, so this can all just happen within the provinces. The provinces in general are more likely to want to see these through because they get the royalties. And so industry will just say, whatever, keep your IAA, but make the projects that fall under its designation very few and very far in between.
Is that part of the Alberta Sovereignty Act stuff that's really...
It is. In fact, just last week, she threatened before the UCP convention that she would, the amendments that they did make to the Impact Assessment Act were still not constitutional, still did not reach the threshold of meeting what the Supreme Court said they had to do. And just last week, they did file to the Alberta Court of Appeal to say that, to force the government to make the Impact Assessment Act legal, constitutional, which obviously they should do.
Wow.
I just have another question. So part of the Impact Assessment Act, and I skimmed it, I wouldn't say I read it, I skimmed it, is to sort of give quite a lot of, let's say, power, for lack of a better word, to the Indigenous, to many Indigenous groups and communities that would be naturally affected by mining and et cetera in the northern part of our country. Just for the record, like 95% of Canadians live within 200 kilometers of the border, so everything is north, so that's kind of a vague term. But so there's two questions. One is, how did these amorphous blob of Indigenous, which is unfair because there's many, many different communities, but how do they feel about that? And do they feel a partner, a part of the process, a part of the solution? Or like, how does that work? And sorry, I know this question is muddled, but it's because it's a difficult subject.
Richard, I think about this all the time, and I have some good solutions and answers for you. The first thing that you have to appreciate, though, is that Aboriginal rights are protected under the Constitution. And in 2004, it was affirmed that there is a duty to consult and accommodate. And so there's no getting around that. Pretty much any mining project, any oil and gas project will affect Aboriginal rights. But we've also said that there is no veto, that you of course, you want consent. That is, is what you're trying to achieve. But on the other hand, there is no veto. And at the end of the day, the federal government and provincial governments, the Crown has an obligation to defend the public interest. And the public interest certainly would have Indigenous consent and benefits from these things, but it doesn't include a veto on particular projects. Now, in mining, you are seeing there are a lot of good cases where the miner, and I will give a shout out to Cameco, has been doing this longer and better than most people, where they have good relations, where there is consent, where they are in the procurement chain, where they are a large part of the workforce, and that everyone's quite satisfied with it and everyone's benefiting from it, where you have Indigenous people on the board and all those kinds of things. The Tahltan Nation and what we call the Golden Triangle of Northwest BC, that's mostly their territory. They're very sophisticated. They have, a royalty trust. They are in the procurement. They are granting, consent, or they're, co-developing. So it's not that it's impossible. Now, what a mining proponent would want to see, especially in terms of the Impact Assessment Act, is some reasonable scoping. And so in Canada, the only projects you're seeing really go forward are world-class deposits, where the quality of deposit is just so good that, okay, you can invest the money, you're going to get a return over 40 years. It's, you can't go wrong. But it's the medium-sized projects that, China would have developed, in 2008 or 1972, that those aren't going forward. And one reason is if the Impact Assessment Agency scopes so many Indigenous communities, even if they're 150, 200, 250 kilometers away. If you're a mining company, yes, you want to have good relations with the 1 or 2, maybe 3 First Nations that are in the territory actually affected, and do an impact and benefit assessment with them, and they would get some benefits and figure that out. If the IA says, well, you have to consult with 8 First Nations or 12 First Nations, that's going to be 8 impact and benefit agreements. It's going to be 12 impact and benefit. That it's not economic. That's the end of that project. And so what I think from the mining side you're trying to say is be reasonable in your scoping, really have it be whose rights are really impacted and what is a reasonable accommodation of those rights, which isn't to say that there's no mining, but I do want to iterate. I've done a lot of work with a lot of communities, and the vast majority are not against development. They're against being left out. And so
agreed.
we have
We
have a lot of tools to make sure that they also benefit from, the trillions of dollars of riches that we do have in Canada.
And rightly so, by the way. I think that's true for whether you're in Dubai or, in Indonesia with the new boom in nickel mining, whether you're in Australia or any other country.
Yeah.
Anyway,
exactly.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Is there,
Steve?
as we get closer to wrapping up here, I want to be mindful of your time. I guess I have a couple of questions, which is like, one, I guess, what from your perspective, what is the general mood or consensus today in the Canadian energy space? You've got the Liberal government here, which is, of course, falling in the polls, and there's an election coming up next year. So there's maybe a bit more uncertainty. You now know the outcome of the U.S. elections. What is the general mood?
Yeah, great question. Everyone is, sick and tired of this Liberal government. I can't deny otherwise. I don't think it's a secret. And so, there's optimism that there's some light at the end of the tunnel, that we might have some more pragmatic, discussions going forward. But there are some bright spots, and I have to say, and you have to acknowledge that we have never produced more. And a big part of that is that, Line 3 was expanded a couple of years ago, and now TMX came online, and now we have LNG Canada starting up. So we finally have egress. Egress is what was killing us, giving us the differential, where we had to sell at a discount, where if we could sell our products on a global market, we would be getting $10, $20, $30, $40 more a barrel, et cetera. So now we can sell in global markets, which also reduces the differential for what we sell to the Americans. So even as, the barrel is pretty low right now, natural gas is pretty low, but $70 WTI with a $12 differential with the Canadian dollar that is weak, which means that they're getting paid in US dollars quite high, they might still be getting $90 Canadian for their barrel. It depends on, it was up to 100, in the spring when the price is a bit higher, it's probably about, down a bit lower now. They're still really quite profitable. And what people don't appreciate is that Canadian oil sands, almost in general, and for the most part, has a lower break-even cost than American shale now, new American shale. And so we are the low-cost barrel finally, and we will be forever. So you do have some optimism that the differential has lowered. American shale looks to be peaking. We've never produced more. We've never exported more. And and it still feels like this is a low point, that if every other indicator, every other, scenario is only going to get better, from, winter 2024. And so there's, I would say, cautious optimism. They are making billions of dollars in profits every quarter. CNRL is doing very well. Suncor had a great quarter. So they're making money, they're returning it, but the sentiment is also return it, pay down debt, return it to shareholders. There's not much, even you say Keystone XL, there's almost no interest around here to build Keystone XL.
That was my next question.
Or to fill Keystone XL. Because what was going to fill Keystone XL last time was Teck's Frontier Mine. And that's dead because of the Liberals. But Teck is not, obviously, Teck went kind of, woke kind of after and moved off of coal and moved off of oil and moved into copper. And I think copper will do very well. I don't think it's a bad business decision, but they're certainly not going to reprise, Teck Frontier. The next big one, that's still kind of in the books is Suncor's Base Extension mine. And it would be over 200,000 barrels, but you could probably stick that into TMX or into, a slightly expanded Line 3 also. So there isn't a lot of appetite here to advance a $10 billion project, I guess.
So is your opinion Keystone XL is kind of, despite maybe Trump wanting to revive it, it's probably dead?
He killed it this week with that tariff threat.
Interesting. Okay.
Interesting.
If he wants it, this is my favorite line. We're going to build a beautiful pipeline on our southern border, and the United States is going to pay for it.
I love it.
Yeah, we're not building that thing till they pay for it.
Rich,
Wow.
Keith, any final parting words?
Just, you're awesome. Thanks so much for this. That was great.
This is a great conversation. Thank you, Heather.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks for coming on. We'll look forward to having you on again here soon.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thought that was super insightful. I think that was up there, top episodes in terms of interviews. Just the level-headedness of the information,
Well, I think Rich is both excited and devastated at the same time.
Why?
Well, you're excited to hear such an enthusiastic conversation about all the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And you're also devastated to know that, Rich, you have an end date coming up at some point.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to get replaced.
Yeah.
I'm going to
You'll get replaced. If you ever leave, we'll get Heather to come on
We've found a worthy replacement for me. I mean, first of all, what a tour de force from Heather. That was incredible. As someone who thought they knew a little bit about the energy sector in Canada, it's amazing to be. Yeah, that was quite humbling. That was incredible. I have nothing to add other than to say thanks, Heather, for joining us. And I hope that some people in Canada, in Ottawa, are listening because that was really amazing. So
this will be a really good conversation for our listeners to share this episode with somebody who should be hearing this story, this narrative.
I think the big thing
gave us some good vibes to talk about other things today. I think. Correct.
Definitely got some good vibes. Sorry, Steve.
Well, it's more just like I was reading like all these things, and the Trump tariffs were announced 25%. Of course, like the mainstream media immediately went to like, oh my God, 25%. This is happening. We told you guys, Orange Man bad. Da da da. Like, and it was just like, and then you get her on, and she gives like a level of practicality. It says, listen, this is the facts. These are the numbers. And this is the reality of realistically placing a 25% tariff on our energy sector and what that will look like. And yeah, so I think it was just good to sort of unpack that. I mean, most Canadians aren't, and nor should they be experts on the energy space. And so that's why we bring on, guests such as Heather. And yeah, hopefully it was a good vibe. Hopefully it was a good vibe for everybody.
I definitely got some good vibes. I really want to know more about if I could go back, and next time when we have her again, hopefully I'll still be on the show. And I'll ask her about the mining and sort of how that's evolved, because I think that's something. I think we always spend a lot of time talking about oil, rightly so. But mining is, I think, super interesting. And as she mentioned, if we're going to need 6 times more minerals, how the hell are we going to get that? And why can't Canada be part of that solution? But
I was going to ask about the uranium side, just on what's happening in the uranium space, the renaissance in nuclear energy that is now coming full circle. But yeah, Rich, because I think it was was it in the news today that France is in the process of dishing out
Yeah.
massive loans to build nuclear reactors?
Yeah, interest-free loans for 6 new nuclear reactors. And I got some, in a beautiful twist of irony, there's some grumblings on the ground in Germany that they want to turn them back on because, they haven't been destroyed yet. They're just sitting there mothballed, which is freaking
I
nuts.
still
by
can't
the way.
believe that. It's just totally insane.
23 gigawatts. That would put them like 6th or 7th or whatever in the world after China, US, France, and maybe a couple dozen other, like a couple other countries. Like wild. It went from 23 gigawatts to 0. Crazy.
All
Anyway, sorry.
all on ideology.
Yeah.
These are nothing on practicality or common sense. Just this is our
But
ideology.
if they want to turn them back on now, Rich, how long does it take to crank it up?
So again, I'm not a nuclear physicist, and we should have Dr. Kiefer back on because I think there's some stuff going on there. But I think relatively easy to turn them back on. That's what I as I understand it. So not like 5 years. We're talking, within a year, as I understand it. I could be wrong, and we'll get someone who actually knows the answer. But
that may not be fast enough for the Germans right now.
Well,
hey, while we're on
because
this,
they're bleeding thousands of jobs.
Oh yeah, of course.
Deficit is just exploding higher. Like they need help pronto. Sorry, Steve.
while we're on this topic, did you guys see this Bloomberg article that came across the desk here the other day? So it says BlackRock Vanguard accused of antitrust violations by Texas. So BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street Corp were sued by a group of states led by Texas for allegedly breaking antitrust law by boosting electricity prices through their investments in the highest profile lawsuit yet against the beleaguered ESG industry. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton and 10 other states claim the money managers combined their market clout and membership in climate groups to pressure coal producers to cut output. Shortages have caused Texans and residents of other states to pay higher power bills, according to the lawsuit filed Wednesday in a federal court.
Yikes. That's really interesting. That's really interesting.
I don't know. Like it's as Heather mentioned and Keith talked about, it feels like the pendulum is kind of swinging back in the other direction.
And I think it not. I don't think I can see it now. So it's happening. It's also happening with a lot of DEI policies or commitments and it's from the private sector. That's where it's happening first. So hey, it doesn't mean that's going to be a better world, but it's going to be different than what we just experienced. So yeah, we have to adapt for it. So it is creating a different vibe. We've been talking about vibes here all day, and Rich always has a cool vibe going on, and Steve has the King of Kitsilano vibe, and I'm just friggin' cool. But what else? What's the vibe?
Yeah, speaking of the vibe and the private sector. So, Rich, I know we were chatting with this before we recorded, but so there was a note out today that Canada has only added 94,000 jobs this year while bringing in approximately 1.2 million people. So the payroll employment fell in Canada in September. Yeah, Rich, I know you kind of unpacked this a little bit more in your chart, but I wanted to talk about it just in terms of like the whole Vibecession thing. If people aren't familiar with that, Chrystia Freeland, the finance minister, was out saying, we're cutting the GST and we're going to mail you a check because, the economy is pretty good. It's actually not bad. Inflation's coming down. GDP is doing fine, but, just people don't feel good. Like people feel like it's a recession. So it's a Vibecession is what she called it, which again, I feel is kind of a slap in the face to the large amount of people.
But let's go back through our university studies and CFA studies, and I don't exactly remember the class where we talked about a vibe session. Do you, Rich? I don't remember that one.
I don't remember that one either. I was pretty let's say my choices in university weren't always the best, so maybe I forgot it in a haze of cloudy haze. But no, I never.
So I felt like people were being scolded for not feeling as confident as they should be. That was the gist of it. But so, by the way, everyone who's listening, if anyone didn't see the clip or hear it or read it, we do encourage you to find it. All of my friends outside of Canada in my network, they were literally howling with laughter. Like they just find this hysterical. of the leaders we have in our country and the stuff they're coming out with. And they say, do you have any more of these leaders up there? And I say, oh yeah, we got a bunch of them. But continue, guys. This was a fun one.
It's just embarrassing. I mean, like, I get it in a way. I can't believe I'm going to say this. I sort of get it in a sense that you don't want everyone in your economy to be miserable and to feel like we're in a downward death spiral, because you can get, a vicious circle. And I think that the Bank of Canada mentioned, deflation being an issue. And then the reason deflation is not disinflation or lower inflation, but deflation is such an issue, because if people collectively think prices are falling, then that sort of can compound and manifest and snowball. And if everyone thinks prices are falling, then everyone together will rein in their consumption and delay their consumption. And if people all do that at the exact same time, you can get a real sort of negative feedback loop. But I don't think that that's what she was talking about at all. I think that what she was talking about was extremely superficial. And gaslighting Canadians, I think, is really inappropriate at this time. But yeah, that's my view on it.
Rich, what are those numbers on the?
Oh, right.
Can you walk through those numbers?
Back to this tweet. When I first saw it, Steve, I thought it was wrong, and so I spent half an hour trying to like double check it, because I usually double check.
He was late for the podcast, running his spreadsheet. True story.
Yes, I was late for the podcast because I was doing this instead. And so, just to be crystal clear, it's not this year; it's year on year. So in the 12 months previous, the population growth in Canada has gone up by 1.2 million. And according to there's two types of labor force surveys. One is called the Survey of Employment Payrolls and Hours, which is what came out today. That's gone up by 94.9 thousand. And the labor force survey has gone up by 300,000. But anywhere you slice it, it's crazy. Over the last 12 months, we've increased our population by 1.2 million, and we've added either 95,000 jobs or 300,000 jobs, depending on which survey you look at. And that gap is bananas.
The chart's wild.
It's a bananas chart. And that's not healthy. Sorry, to be very clear, that's not healthy for your economy.
But this is why there's so much, again, angst. And then you have like politicians coming out and saying, well, it's just a vibe that you're feeling. You just, numbers. Yeah, I don't know. It's, again, I feel like it's like a slap in the face. But, it's crazy. And just to see, I don't know if you guys have been following along with what's happening as well in this temporary resident stuff, is you're seeing all these protests happening across, particularly Ontario. I think it was 4.9 million non-permanent residents are basically, you need to leave by
it's never going to happen
sometime next year. And the problem is we talked about this on the show before, but they don't calculate when people leave. There's no way to know if any of the 4.9 million people actually left. We're just supposed to assume that they're, law-abiding citizens or people, and they're just going to leave. And so, again, I think with all these protests that are happening, yeah, people are upset. It's not a good story.
Yeah.
Well, so let's sort of bring this around. I know we go back to every week. Hey, has the trend changed anywhere? So the trend in Canada is that our policymakers are telling us that we should feel better, right? So, in other words, the trend has not changed. We continue to grind lower, tighter and tighter. We see here this morning that the Brazil real has hit an all-time low. So we have that happening. We also know, if you're following, we talked about Germany now for a while. The French story is actually becoming interesting again. And so, their budget is starting to look a bit wobbly. And if you're into the cost of money, the price of money, if you look at the 10-year yield in France, it's exactly the same as what the Greek 10-year yield is. Amazing. So, so 15, 20 years ago, if I said to you, you know what, like 10 years or 15 years from now, the French will be paying the same amount as the Greeks to borrow for 10 years. You would have said, hey, you're loony to think that. So, again, the trend is continuing to go in this direction, that things are getting tighter. So everyone just needs to always sort of bear that in mind. It will turn, the pendulum will swing, but not today, folks. Not today.
Europe looks like a mess.
Yeah. Can't wait to go there. Anyways,
I guess the good question is is it going to get cheaper for Canadians to go to Europe or more expensive? Those are two
I
currencies.
think it'll be cheap. I think CAD will outperform Euro. I think, and we've seen that already. I think in the last month, especially.
Yeah, me too. I agree.
Because one of the things that Canada has in abundance, even though we're being constrained in terms of producing, and of course, is the natural resource sector.
Yeah.
I don't know what Europe has. I mean, they've completely bungled their energy policy in many different ways. So so again, CAD over Euro, the cross rate, I would be long CAD on that trade. And because Euro right now, is about 105 points away from my target.
Yeah, okay.
I love your laugh, Rich. You just make me smile when you giggle.
That's the laugh he gave in the Parliament building there.
Anything else from you guys? There's
I think that's it. I think that
that was a good one.
One important thing is happening in Russia right now. The Russian ruble is really under stress. Like if we stay with the currency focus, and a lot of it is because I think about 50 or like a half 100 of banks over there are being affected by more U.S. sanctions. So the flow of dollars is just got a little bit more difficult for these guys to get. And I was chatting with a friend earlier today. I said, "Hey, what do you think's happening?" They were like, "Well, we could see what's happening. As for what happens next, you don't know, of course. Maybe things stabilize, but you can have an economy or system collapse like very quickly. Like it happens rapidly. You're not given a month's notice or 3 months notice that something is going on. But again, we always suggest you to watch the currency world. And when you start to see a rapid movement in one market over another, then that tells you something is happening there."
Well, can I just add one more little thing on Russia, which I thought was really cool? Because I was looking in this too, and people are talking about they don't have enough dollars, et cetera. But what's really fascinating is the amount of exports so the sanction busting exports that go through Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Turkey, and all that. Which is, I would, as we go forward, I'll keep you guys posted, because those basically, like, Germany used to never export anything to the Kyrgyz Republic. And then that just basically is now a hockey stick through the roof. And so it's basically a way of circumventing these sanctions. And if you look at Italy versus Kyrgyzstan, Italy versus Turkmenistan or Kazakhstan and all these places. And so these European countries that are supposed to be colluding or acting in concert against Russia, all these businesses are exporting through these third parties. And the data is all available on the IMF website. It's all there. And you can see they went from basically zero to literally hundreds of billions of euros worth of export. And so it's interesting to see how that interplays with the ruble, et cetera.
Yeah, anyway. It's really interesting, isn't it? It's certainly a meme of some sort.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to leave it. But as always, guys, hopefully that episode was of use, of value. I think it was a tremendous guest. I think that hopefully more people can get educated on the importance of the energy sector here in Canada. If you found it useful or entertaining, share this episode with at least one friend or family member and help spread the word and grow the Loonie Hour community here. And we'll see you next week.